As you just heard, Prime Minister Mark Carney met with both his cabinet and the premiers today to update them on the status of U.S. trade negotiations. Ralph Goodale is a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Committee on Canada-U.S. Economic Relations and a former Canadian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. He joins me now. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Goodale.
Glad to be here.
What have you heard about this alleged deal on our table? From what we understand, the Advisory Committee actually hasn't met on this yet.
That's correct. The Advisory Committee is on standby, as we have been for the last several weeks. And there have been a number of meetings over the last several weeks, but not in the last 48 hours. So we would expect there will be a meeting called in due course. So we're all judging by what we hear publicly. And I note that scrum down in Washington today with Minister LeBlanc and Ambassador Greer seemed to be a very cordial encounter, indicating that they may well be in the end game of a process that they both would think has been successful. There's time now and in between now and tomorrow night or Friday night to work at any of the fine points, the details that maybe continue to be points of separation, and then that all-important written legal text that both sides can agree upon. The Prime Minister, in a comment earlier today, indicated that the process seems to be moving successfully in a direction that Canada would consider to be satisfactory, that will preserve our trading advantages with the United States and give a greater degree of certainty for the future. All of that is to the good.
I actually want to ask you about that. What did you make of or what should we take away from the misalignment that we saw last night? You know, there's a deal from President Trump, and there's progress from the Prime Minister. A little bit more aligned today, at least with the point men in Washington, but it still seemed like a very different message.
Yeah, I think it's a difference in approach, a difference in style. Mr. Trump is a natural-born salesman of almost anything to anybody. On the other hand, I think the Prime Minister is very prudent. He wants the facts. He wants the hard evidence. The spin is for somebody else, and he will focus on the steak rather than the sizzle. And that's a pretty important factor with the PM. He's all about substance.
There were some. Sorry, go ahead.
I think he'll before he starts to celebrate. I think he'll want to be absolutely sure of his ground. But there's an indication comparing his statements today to what he was saying last evening that progress seems to be moving in the right direction.
Now, there were predictions by many, that Trump would extend the deadline, that was a possible outcome. But it did go down to the wire. So I'm just wondering what you thought when he did finally extend, because it was pretty late last night. What was your sort of first blush reaction when you heard that?
Well, I guess with everything with Mr. Trump, I'll believe it when I see it. And I think that is going to be broadly the reaction from Canadians as the cabinet has been briefed now, and the premiers are being briefed almost as we speak. And then there will be the stakeholders that will be brought into the discussion so that they can be right up to date. And then Canadians will weigh this agreement, presuming there is one. They'll weigh the agreement, all the pros and the cons, the puts and the takes. And I think Canadians will be wary because they have had some pretty bad experiences in dealing with this administration over the last couple of years.
Well, what concessions do you think would be acceptable to Canadians? Because we've obviously had to make some.
Well, you have to see the whole package, and we have been anxious to, first of all, avoid these 50% new tariffs that were threatened to come on this week. Secondly, reduce the existing tariffs by a significant amount. And then thirdly, have a path forward for the renewal of CUSMA, which is the crucial agreement that gives us our trading advantage with the United States. That's what preserves our space and gives us that comparative advantage to the rest of the world. Now, if we get all those three things or variations of them that are acceptable, how good that offer is from the United States will determine the extent to which we would reciprocate in various ways. So it's a give and take situation. People will have to weigh it. And that's undoubtedly the process that the Prime Minister has been going through the last number of hours and days and perhaps weeks, considering what is good enough to result in an agreement.
Well, speaking of that, I did want to ask you about how plausible. We do have sources telling us that, you know, the tariffs on aluminum have been reduced from 50 to 25%, and on steel, and that there has been some movement on autos, although we don't have details on that. How plausible is that? Like, when you hear that, is that something that you think that could be something we see? I think that's within the bounds of reason here, but I think rather than speculating about fragments of the package, we will need to see the whole thing before people can make a judgment. Certainly, getting a tariff cut in half is a significant step forward. But then how does that compare to what would have been the case if there had been no deal at all? And what would be the case comparing the Canadian tariff situation to the rest of the world? Those are the two things I think that you have to weigh carefully. What would be the case if there was no deal? What would be the trade chaos if there was no deal? And secondly, how does this deal, if there is one, how does that compare with what the relationship is with the United States and the rest of the world? That is what will give us our trading advantage going forward, and then certainty, reliability. Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Lastly, can we even count on this being more than a short-term thing?
I think we all have to be alert. We all have to be maybe a little bit skeptical. Don't lose your option list for reaction or retaliation, just in case you may need it at some future date. As the Prime Minister said, we have to be prepared, always prepared for every eventuality, and you can never take anything for granted.
Well, Ralph Goodale, thanks very much for your time. I hope you'll let us know when the advisory committee is briefed on the details, because we'll certainly want to talk to you then. Much appreciate your time.
Very good to talk to you.
Ralph Goodale is a member of the U.S.-Canada Economic Panel, Advisory Panel. Prime Minister Mark Carney said in a statement earlier today, congratulations, Minister LeBlanc and Ambassador Greer, for the significant progress in the Canada-United States trade negotiations. Canada entered these discussions with the best overall trade terms. We are now moving towards an agreement that reinforces that Canadian advantage, including by securing the best terms in each of Canada's most important strategic sectors and providing greater certainty about our future trading relationship. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre reacted to this trade news today, saying his party is willing to help the government get the best deal possible for Canadians.
We renew the offer we've been making for over a year, that we are here to work with all parties, including the government, to fight for a win for Canada. And we hope that over the next couple of days, we'll hear the good news that Mr. Carney will have kept his promise and the Canadians will get a even better deal than we had before.
Meanwhile, Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet is requesting the Prime Minister update the House of Commons on the details of this deal, writing, "We have the right to know what concessions would be in the process of being granted to Donald Trump and the impacts of a potential agreement that would have heavy consequences throughout Quebec. Because if that is the case, I urge the Prime Minister not to sign such an agreement." Well, the Power Panel is here to talk about all of this. Amanda Galbraith was an advisor to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and here with me, Carleen Varayan is a former Chief of Staff to Liberal Cabinet Ministers, and Sherelle Evelyn is the Managing Editor of The Hill Times. Welcome to everyone. Carleen, I'm going to start with you. We don't have a lot of detail. We have both sides now sort of talking up a deal, saying it's a good deal, it's a good deal, it's a good deal for us, it's a good deal for us. What do you think about what we've heard so far?
I think for all the reasons that you've said, we should not be popping our champagne corks just yet. We can put the bottles on ice, but there's a long way to go. I mean, the president still has until midnight Friday, in theory, to change his mind. Some things have been signed, not all things have been signed. This is not a president known for his consistent position on things. This could still be fluid. The other reason I would say that we don't necessarily want to be jumping for joy yet is because this is a piece of, it's a temporary issue resolved. But as Canadians, I think, have learned over the course of the last Trump administration and certainly this one, the president's word or signature on a piece of paper doesn't necessarily mean you can take it to the bank. I think that what you'll hear the Prime Minister talk about a lot in the days to come is probably that this deal creates some stability, but that he'll remain focused on these other pieces that ensure that the long-term solution to American unpredictability is actually needing America less. So trade diversification, building security and energy pacts with other countries, these pieces of the puzzle that they're also working concurrently to put into place.
Okay. Sherelle, negotiators seemed very far apart not too long ago, and then suddenly we have the makings of a deal. What do you think changed?
Well, obviously, with the deadline kind of bearing down, I think everybody was really motivated to actually get something done. I don't know if there was, maybe the president was just in a good mood and he just said, hey, yeah, let's talk. And he was more willing to do so. And nothing came up over the course of the last few days to change that direction. I do think it is a sign that, progress is possible. We don't know. Basically, we're on the road to somewhere. We don't know where exactly that road leads to, but we're on the road to somewhere. And after, over a year of, this back and forth and stalemate after stalemate and concession after concession, it is good to be able to say we have made progress. But the fact that we don't know what that progress is and if that progress is going to include tariffs, which I'm pretty sure it will be, because that is what the president has said. That is his bread and butter.
It's what the Prime Minister has said as well.
It's what the Prime Minister has said as well. He said, this is what we're going to have to accept, some baseline of tariffs. So it is setting things up for, the opposition, the Conservatives. We heard them say they want no tariffs, and to say, this was a failure, but it is a step forward.
Amanda, do you think what we're going to see is a bunch of sort of separate MOUs or deals or one big comprehensive monster deal?
I mean, if I knew that, I wouldn't be on the show right now. I'd be talking to a whole bunch of clients. What's in there? I don't know. Obviously, this is not the whole enchilada, which is everybody's driving towards a CUSMA renewal of some sort. There have been signals that there will be baseline tariffs, things will be lowered, but I think part of what's happening, is my understanding, is that the Prime Minister is off to meet, as we know, with the premiers, with other folks to brief them and bring them on board to see if he can sell this thing across the country. And gating to that is EB, is Premier Ford, is other folks, key industry leaders, right? This thing is dead on arrival if we don't have a chorus of people outside the PMO saying, this makes sense, this is a good deal, this is good for Canadians. Because as we've already seen, Bloc Québécois lining up saying this. We've got live elections in Quebec right now, including by-elections and if an election this fall that could line up against us. So I think it's a real tough challenge. I think the Prime Minister would be well placed to, I think, be more comprehensive in his descriptions of what is happening, what we have and have not given up, because I think Canadians give him a lot of space on this. But if they get into the trap that they got into around the Ambassador Bridge, which was, trust me, this is a good deal, not giving lots of details, I think they're going to be in trouble as the opposition, as industry, as the premiers pick away at this over the next week and a bit. So, remains to be seen. My suspicion is it's probably not one big thing, but several different things. But we will, of course, find that out in the next 48 hours.
And in terms of communication, not to the Gordie Howe Bridge, also even once we did get all the details, it was very confusing. So I assume the advice you would give as well is to be pretty clear so people actually understand what the details are. Once we have the details.
I would say, for sure. I think we could call it charitably misleading or not speaking clearly. Did not do them in good stead. And I think the Prime Minister, we've all seen the polling numbers. I think people trust him to deal with this. I think they trust him his word to say this is the best deal that we could get. But if they choose, we also know he does not like to be questioned in depth. We know that he doesn't want to be cross-examined by the media at times. And I think if they fall into that trap, and I'm guessing it's been long hours and long days and they're tired and they're sprinting towards this thing over the next 48 hours, it's sort of Damocles over their head. If they fall into that trap, I think they're going to be in trouble.
Now, Sherelle, as Amanda said, there's selling it to the provinces, the premiers, the industry, having them on board. But generally, it's also getting Canadians on board. And we know the mood for concessions. Poll after poll tells us it's not good. No. So there will be concessions, though. So how does the Prime Minister sell it to Canadians?
Well, it's a key question, because if ultimately people are still going to be in industries there's going to be hits to their livelihoods, maybe it's not going to be as bad as it was. Like, sure, that's good, but if you're still getting hurt, you're not going to be too happy about the fact that maybe it's your hand that's broken instead of your whole arm. I mean, you're still being affected. Having the premiers on board, I think, will be key. In the past, and I'm wondering if lessons have been learned about communication, reading people in. We saw things like as recently as the agreement that was made with China, and you had Premier Ford out the next day, bashing that deal. So that is not what you want to happen. You want to get people on side, and the fact that this is something that requires premiers to agree. If we find out that, say, they put ending those bans on selling of alcohol, liquor, American liquor in provincial stores is on the table, they need the premiers for that. That is not something that Mark Carney or the federal government can promise. So getting to that point and bringing them on side and getting them all to stand with them, that's going to be major.
Well, and Carleen, in terms of industry, so we know that he has briefed the premiers today. We know as well that he's not briefed yet, that we know of, the advisory committee or industry. Yeah. And I'm wondering, though, when it comes, is that smart not to have done that yet? Because if anyone needs to get on board, I would say it would be industry.
Negotiations like these are so tough because you're sort of darned if you do, darned if you don't. If you bring everybody into the loop and give them the play-by-play, you risk leaks, which can be incredibly damaging if you're still in live negotiations and in a bit of horse trading and tit for tat. So you need to keep the circle close, and you only open the kimono so far. But at the same time, you need to ensure that you have these people's buy-in. That's why I think that Canada-US Council that really represents that cross-section of Canadian industry. So yes, the auto sector, but also the screen sector, the agricultural sector, our fertilizer industry, our mining industry. That's why the Prime Minister consulting with those groups for so long leading up to this is important, because he and Minister LeBlanc and Janice Charette need to have the confidence when they're in that room at that table that they know what those groups are going to be pleased with and what's going to be a red line for them.
And Amanda, Pierre Poilievre offered his help. He has also done that in the past in securing a deal, but also criticized the government for all the concessions that he says were made to get to this point. Is it fair to say that Canada didn't use its leverage as fully as it should have? Or do we even know that since we're not in the negotiating room?
I don't think we know that because we're not in the negotiating room. I think we do have a tremendous amount of leverage, right? We have the fourth largest oil reserve in the world. We have 10 of the 12 strategic minerals that, is essential. Like, we have a lot of leverage. And I think even, you could argue how meaningless alcohol is not on store shelves, but certainly everybody's talking about it, including the US president, right? So I think that we have a lot of points that stick. I think the Conservatives are the opposition, and they should be holding the government to account. The Prime Minister himself set the deadline of more than a year ago that we would get to a deal right around the G7, which did not occur. I think Canadians are willing to give them space because they have the foil of President Trump being unreasonable. But I think, and I think it's fair that he's offered to help. How much help the opposition can lend to a government and negotiations with the foreign government, to me, is probably minimal, but the soundbite sounds good. I think where the opposition is going to need to show their mettle is over the next little bit, right? Is how do they point out these are the right things for the country, while also saying these are the industries that are being left behind. How do we advocate for folks who are going to be hit by these concessions, because we see them, that will be happening? Also, are we willing to swallow base tariffs, which I think are kind of going to happen regardless? So, I mean, I think Pierre Poilievre has to kind of walk a bit of a tightrope here, just as much as the prime minister, in a different way. But I feel where he is really going to be spotlit or raised up is once we know the details of this deal and how they choose to pick fights on behalf of which industries and which individuals in the country.